Thank you, Peter, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. As Peter indicated, my name is Sebastia Antezana Quiroga, and I am an International Humanities Postdoctoral Fellow in the Department of Hispanic Studies and the Cogut Institute, with an affiliation with the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. I am really happy to be here today and to tell you a little about my research work. Since the 1970s, several thinkers from the Global South have critically analyzed the dilemma of identification processes structured by the form of the nation, and have argued that the national model is a non-representative mode of community. At the same time, multiple cultural manifestations have pointed out the contemporary crisis of national identities and cultures, what Ramachandra Guha calls the historic failure of the nation to come into its own, which of course implies a necessary rethinking of the links between culture, art, and socio-political modes of organization. The Latin American Subaltern Studies Group points out in its founding statement that, quote, the elites represented by the national bourgeoisie and or the colonial administration are responsible for inventing the ideology and reality of nationalism, end of quote. That is, while the elites of the continent command the destinies of their societies with a divisive exclusionary logic, the nation itself is located at the point of intersection between the old and the new, in which elites still occupy a hegemonic role. The national model in Latin America seems to be experiencing a moment of transition in which colonial, post-colonial, and other forces overlap and confuse. Thus, the nation seems to be increasingly less relevant as a model of sociopolitical organization, and instead new forms are constantly generated, such as binationalism, transnationalism, multinationalism, and even post-nationalism. In my research, I focus specifically on the cases of Mexico and Bolivia and some of their contemporary cultural production, specifically their literature and film, to understand this paradigm shift. Why Mexico and Bolivia? Well, because they're two of the few Latin American societies in which the national model has been most directly challenged, first in the form of true national revolutions, and later by rewriting their national constitutions. In the Mexican case, they have constitutionally adopted a multicultural model that recognizes the partial autonomy of indigenous peoples, and which many consider an initial step to reach multinationalism. And in the Bolivian case, they have constitutionally adopted a multinational model which officially leaves aside the unitary nation. In both cases, this responds to two factors. The first, a long history of exclusion suffered by Mexican and Bolivian indigenous peoples who were never really part of the Mexican and Bolivian nation. And second, a sustained migration of Mexicans and Bolivians to neighboring countries and the consequent creation of what is called Greater Mexico and what I call Greater Bolivia, transnational and diasporic Mexican and Bolivian expressions that transcend their national territories and spill into neighboring societies. Perhaps curiously, in the last 4 decades, cultural manifestations such as the literature and cinema of Greater Mexico, Greater Bolivia have begun representing their migrant communities and as specters and ghosts, figures that return from death to disjoin the political and cultural coordinates of their present. Now, why is this happening? How can we understand this seemingly coordinated choice? In my work, I argue that these afterlife figures appear as spectral embodiments of the tensions that challenge the nation, because they're strategic responses to the realization that although the national paradigm has been declared obsolete, and in some cases has been constitutionally declared inviable, it still remains present, sustained in the practices, traditions, beliefs, and worldviews of these societies, like a specter that does not renounce the world of the living. Thus, while on the one hand, the aforementioned inviolability of the national paradigm has long been declared and even celebrated in Mexico and Bolivia, on the other, it still remains, even as the ruinous, ghostly shell of what it was meant to be, and not for that diminished or less prevalent in the ways people from Greater Bolivia and Greater Mexico understand and process everyday life. My goal as a postdoctoral fellow at the Cogut Institute is to study the complex ways in which art anticipates, accompanies, and examines this ghost of the nation. I'm very happy and excited about being able to do so in the coming years. Thank you very much.